Right, I just wanted to put this photograph up first because I've entered the Images of Research exhibition and competition which the Doctoral school is running. I think it starts next week. And you had to enter a photograph that represented your research and a written abstract to go with it that had to be aimed at the public. So not full of lots of academic references and jargon. So this is one of the women whom I interviewed for my research, exploring the experiences of women at work who've been treated for gynaecological cancer. And this is a photo of her with her granddaughter, and sadly she is no longer alive because her cancer returned and she died a year ago, but her daughters gave permission for me to use this image and also for the photograph of her granddaughter to be there. And this was the, it's a very short abstract that we had to write. Sorry, it's not so fast as I expected it to be. So I entitled it A Ray of Hope because her granddaughter represents continuity and also the fact that she was putting on a brave face to the world and looking good despite having cancer for the second time. And the image symbolises the courage, strength and hope of all the women that I interviewed as part of my research for my PhD. Obviously I've said there what I was doing and some of the perceptions and insights that particularly relate to that picture. And these were said by different women, not the woman in the photograph. Underneath it all, it's changed me, but you wouldn't know that from meeting me. It's like a mask that I put on before I go out of the door. Another person said, I spoke at a conference. You don't know what's underneath. If you saw me, you wouldn't think there was anything wrong. And a third person who has some wonderful insights. Cancer can be so dark, and it's made me look for the tiny flickers in that darkness and move towards them. And these are the things that make me feel good and glad to be alive. And obviously for the woman in the photograph, one of the flickers in the darkness was the arrival of her granddaughter. So I hope, I think the exhibition is going to be in the Peter de Wint building. So by all means go along, and it's PhD students and existing academics who've done images of their research. So this is my presentation. I'll just check how much longer have I got? About 15 minutes. Yeah. Okay. I'd originally done more slides because we thought we would have more time, so I'll try and get through it in the time allotted. So this is the working title of my PhD thesis, and I've gone through the whole cycle up to around now. So why am I doing it? Well, as you're probably all aware, that even 2 years ago, Macmillan was saying, and I think it's now definitely, 1 in 2 people will get cancer at some point in their lives. And the Eve appeal have actually done statistics about how many women are diagnosed with gynaecological cancer and how many people die per year. And the reason I chose to focus on gynaecological cancer is because I've got personal experience of it, but also a lot of the research and the publicity in the UK is particularly around breast cancer for women. And there's starting to be some more research now for prostate cancer. So women make up, a huge proportion of the workforce. A lot of women are the sole breadwinners or the higher earner in the partnership, or they may be widowed or divorced, etc. And so it's really important not to lose their skills from the job market. So I started out sifting ideas, looking at loads of previous research, identifying if there was a gap, and there certainly was, because most of the research on gynae cancers has been done by, as you'd expect, by medics, and of course they're very into quants and statistics, and they want to know the survival rate after 5 years or the survival rate after 10 years. But what I was interested in is the qualitative research, how the women felt, how it had affected their work and their relationships. So I started off by mind mapping the project, and doing field work, and obviously there were themes arising at each stage. So that was one of my original mind maps. So I am not a techie, so somebody did this for me, and I can't go in and change things. So it should say Netherlands instead of Holland, and it should, the psychological, is spelled wrongly as well with the typing. But you can get an idea, there's a huge range of issues, and then I had to start to narrow it down and decide from the reading what I was actually going to look at. And I started off thinking I'm going to look at identity at work, dignity at work, which of course my Director of Studies is an expert in, gender and employment. And then another thing that came from my reading was particularly about illness narratives, because there's quite a lot that have been written about cancer and disability. And then I had to decide what methodology to use, and I looked at things like autoethnography that was talked about this morning. But I decided I wanted to go for something that I don't think we've got many specialists on in the business school, but to look at narrative inquiry. Because when I read about that, it seemed to really fit the type of research I was doing and enabled me and the women to make meaning of the experiences. And I decided to do unstructured interviewing, and obviously I've had to justify the choice of all of these things in my thesis. So I started out with initial research questions, which are listed on here. From that I derived my research objectives, and I like things to have, I like to look at the academic side of things, but I like things to have a practical application. So to me, there was no point in doing this research if I'm not going to try to effect change with it. So what I wanted to do was, and also I got the women, they've given me loads and loads of ideas, made recommendations to enable HR professionals, because that's my subject area that I was in, line managers, and other professionals such as NHS, to support women who wish and need to remain in work during and post-treatment for gynae cancer. Because you may or may not be aware, but I certainly found out with the research that there are some organisations, or some line managers in particular, when they hear the word cancer, they think equals death equals we must get rid of this person as quickly as possible because it's going to cost us a lot of money. Because they're going to be off sick a lot and go into hospital. And then they might not be well enough to work. I know that sounds really hard. Not everyone was like that. There was a lot of good employers. But I'm sorry to say there were still quite a few people who thought like that. So, as I said, I chose the methodology of narrative inquiry, and I may facilitate the women telling their stories. Obviously, Muslin's written a lot about narrative inquiry, and I wanted to use it to understand the complex processes which people use in making sense of organisational realities. I'm a big fan of, ever since I was an undergraduate, and this gives away my age, in 1972, when I went to university and you were encouraged to read widely and outside your subject area, and have discussions and debates and be interested in politics and the anti-apartheid movement and all of that, which seems to have gone out of the window in modern universities. And I read some books by a guy called Studs Terkel from Chicago. He got the nickname Studs because he used to read loads of cowboy books. And that was a common name for the cowboys. So, and he was a master of this, and he's written 10, 15 books. Oral history, using unstructured interviews. So I've just listed 3 of his books there, and I've put the details down at the bottom for anybody who is interested in them. But I mean, he was writing about race in 1992, and his that book's been recently reissued with an introduction by Gary Young, who has written a lot about black issues in America and in the UK. It's been on TV as well. So Ryan and Bell, I mean, I don't know how Terkel did the interviews. He just used a microphone and recorded them, but he got people all across America to really open up about issues. The first book of his I read in 1972 was the one about working. People talk about what they do all day and how they feel about what they do. So I should have realised that years and years later I would end up working in a business school. So the interviews themselves, I started off at the beginning. I did an interview with BBC Radio Nottingham through the support group that I was in at Nottingham City Hospital, and talking about my research then. And then I had to design the questions and pilot the interview, and also design consent forms and things like that. And then I did recruiting of the participants by a variety of means. That is hard work. For those of you starting out on, or earlier in the PhD process, that is, you need to allow a lot of time for that. Because I thought, oh, I've got loads and loads of contacts, it would be no problem to locate people to interview. But that didn't actually happen because of COVID. And obviously I've put the list on the impacts there. It also, I lost some key contacts because the centre head at Maggie's Nottingham, who was very supportive of my research, left. The Not Gosh support group, which had 60 people in it, and several of them had wanted to listen to my preliminary talk and said, oh yes, I'll be interviewed. I only got through 4 before the group broke up. And then Lincolnshire set up a VO Become support group for women with cancer, and that also folded up. I wasn't having much luck, really. So obviously I had to widen my net, and I went through St Barnabas, Lincolnshire, because one of my MSc HRN students was the director of HR there, and she very kindly let me put an article in their staff newsletter, and I got some people through that. And then I had to go wider because of COVID, and I went to Pelvic Radiation Disease Association and Joe's Cervical Cancer Trust. So that meant that I've interviewed women from all over the UK, Scotland, Wales, and most of the counties in the UK. The 2 hardest to reach groups with gynae cancers are black women and young working class women. Because both groups, probably for different reasons, distrust conventional medicine, and they often, in all the research that's been done, especially in the States, they don't present with gynae cancers until it's really far advanced and it's very difficult to treat. So I got some young women through Joe's Cervical Cancer Trust, and I was in dialogue with the woman in Nottingham who set up the Sisters Against Cancer, and she interviewed me because she wanted to make sure that I understood the culture. And then we'd got it all arranged for me to go and talk to a group of women, and of course the lockdown happened. So that's the one gap in my research in terms of people that I interviewed. I did 20 interviews. Each interview was at least 2 hours long. That wasn't me, because I know I can talk a lot, but I made sure that I listened. And for some of the women I interviewed, they haven't really talked in any depth about their experience to anybody. And I just opened the floodgate when I asked them the first question, like, tell me about when you were diagnosed with cancer, how did it impact on your work? Some of them just talked for an hour and a half. And I had some prompt questions, because it was mainly unstructured. But what I would do is, just as I was listening, I'd think, oh yes, they've covered that, mentioned that. So, and they also brought up the things I hadn't considered. I did 7 face-to-face interviews before the lockdown, and then I did 12 by telephone and 1 by email, as one of the women I interviewed was hearing impaired. But to be honest, she was completely deaf, so she couldn't do a phone interview. I did get an inclusive sampling in terms of all of the factors I've listed there, and the importance of oral history, which allows marginalised and disempowered voices to come through. So although I did get some middle class respondents, I got people from lots of other different groups as well. And particularly I got people who told me what it was really like for them in terms of finance. You know, so because obviously middle class, as Brewster says here, financial hardship associated with illness may be absent. Those are all the networks I dealt with. It was on a voluntary basis. I did the ethical approach as required in terms of cognitive research, consent forms, storage of information, etc. I also kept a reflective journal, and I also got scraps of paper that were tucked in that, just things that occurred to me, as they do, when you're sitting reading your novel at night and you're thinking, oh yes, that happened, and what you said, thought about something. And I've also inserted periodic reviews of progress. One of the ways I did this was using a template from a University of Lincoln Doctoral School course on productive writing with Dr. Joanna Young in 2019. So the questions, the template she gave me on that course, but those are my answers in relation to my own research. Some key things from fieldwork that I've selected some out. The consultant looked at me and said, well, it is cancer, and so the first chapter is the journey to diagnosis. A later chapter is about the work experiences. You can see there what an employer said to a woman who was employed there. I feel much less confident. This was talking about identity and work. And then the financial impact of cancer, which is often underestimated. And there was one woman who had cancer, and sadly her husband had had cancer as well. They both kept working through the treatment because she said they'd previously lost their house. I think it was in the recession in the 80s. And so she said they had to hang on to their jobs because they didn't want to go back there again. Other psychological impact. One thing that came out that was completely unexpected was I think virtually all of the 20 women wanted to help other people. So they were doing radio interviews, they were awareness raising by speaking to groups, they were fundraising for Macmillan, one woman was taking part in trials of drugs, so it was amazing that despite what they'd gone through, they wanted to help other women and other people with cancer. It's about persevering to get help with the side effects of treatment, because I'm afraid the NHS didn't always come out well in this research. I did find, for example, that all the women who had private medicine got diagnosed, got seen much more quickly than the women who went by the NHS. Some women as well highlighted that PAs or receptionists or whatever acted as barriers or gatekeepers, and they knew something was wrong, they wouldn't let them see the consultant or the doctor. They got fobbed off with the nurse and had to keep going back. And of course you're using that time and the cancer can develop into a further stage. So recommendations as a whole, well, these are just the tip of the iceberg. And I've put there about quicker diagnosis in the health service, but also one person who was an ex-nurse said they need to back-end the research funding and support, because the government puts a lot of money into quicker diagnosis, but they do nothing about helping people living with the long-term effects of cancer treatment. And somebody else said they needed support both in and outside work, not being left to get on with it on their own. And they also wanted to see things as not postcode lottery, because another thing about my research being UK-wide was there was a big difference in people who lived in cities and people who lived in rural areas in terms of treatment and support. So what next? This is where I'm aiming to, when I finally finish this thesis, publish some research and raise awareness. My former lead gynaecologist at Nottingham Hospitals Trust has been really supportive about my research. He put me in touch with the chief radiographer and various other people to talk to, and he's actually said I've kept him updated on my progress, and he wants me to talk to the whole of his team at Nottingham City Hospital about my findings. And through another contact, I've got somebody, deputy medical Frances, her name is Deputy Medical Officer of Health in Scotland, so obviously she's keen to know about the findings. And then, you know, it's a job about lobbying for change. Politicians, trade unions, NHS employers. The research could be developed further with a longitudinal study. And I would definitely like to see there is still a big gap in terms of hard to reach groups. This again was from the course with Dr. Joanna Young, possible journals that I could publish in, and then with thanks to the team. So all the participants who share their stories, the woman in the photograph at the beginning who volunteered to be the pilot interviewee, all the contacts in the groups, family and friends for their support and encouragement, although my husband does occasionally say to me, "Are you coming downstairs?" when I'm in the study. I haven't seen you all day. And Cherry Davis, who I'm pleased to say she used to be a cancer buddy for Not Gosh, but she's now started work for Macmillan. David Linds, whom I've mentioned, and obviously Matthias was sitting over there. And my other supervisor is Dr. Sharon Black, next door from the School of Health and Social Care, and the University of Lincoln and Leeds for part funding my research. So that's where I am at the moment. And Matthias is hoping to see some final work from me. I have to say that because he's sitting there. But I haven't been not doing anything, as you can see. So that's it.
Wonderful, thank you.